Good afternoon, and welcome to the last discussion in this year's African Diplomats Seminar. My name is Johnnie Carson, and I am a senior advisor here at the United States Institute of Peace. I want to extend a special welcome to all the African ambassadors and senior diplomats who have joined us for this event. For all of those who are new to the United States Institute of Peace, USIP was established by Congress 4 decades ago in 1984 as a national, nonpartisan, public institution dedicating to helping to prevent, mitigate, and resolve crises around the globe. We are both a think tank and an institution that works overseas on the ground with host countries and citizens to mitigate and prevent violence and to build community resilience against conflict. As a part of our mission, we have established the African Diplomats Seminar to acquaint newly arrived African diplomats to the programs that we run here at the Institute and to help provide them with a better understanding of how Washington works. We hope that this program will generate a better appreciation of U.S. diplomacy, U.S. development, and U.S. defense policies, and will also strengthen our bilateral and multilateral relationships with the continent. In this year's program, African diplomats from some 33 African countries have attended and participated in the seminar, and we hope it has been a rewarding experience for them. In this final panel discussion, we will hear and engage with senior leaders in and outside of the U.S. government who are engaged on a daily basis with key issues impacting Africa and U.S. African relations. I will moderate a panel discussion with these leaders and provide an opportunity for you to ask questions as well. I will be on stage with these 6 panelists as I do so. Let me briefly say who they are. We welcome Ambassador Suka-Mafudze from the African Union. We welcome Arun Venkataram, Assistant Secretary of Global Markets and Director General of the Foreign Commercial Service. We are also pleased to have with us Maureen Farrell, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for African Affairs in the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense. We also have with us from the Uniformed Services at DoD, Rear Admiral Aaron Osborne, who is a part of the J5 staff and represents the J5 on Middle East and African issues. We also have our Director of the African Center and Vice President of this institute, Dr. Joseph Sani. And finally, we have with us Deputy Assistant Secretary for African Affairs at the African Bureau, Michael Heath. I won't say much more about their biographies. You have them in your brochure. So let me stop and say, let's get underway. There's no spot. Somebody bring me a chair, I think. Somehow we've gotten... Thank you. Now we can get underway. We presented the panelists here with a set of questions that we asked them to think about as they made their way here this afternoon. And so I'm going to start with those questions. And I'm going to start with the person on my right and your left, Deputy Assistant Secretary Michael Heath. And so, Michael, can you share with us what you think have been the three most significant points of achievement in this administration's foreign policy towards Africa, from the perspective of the Africa Bureau and from the perspective of the State Department?
Well, thank you, Johnny, very much. First of all, let me pass along my regrets on behalf of Molly Fee, who was going to be here, Assistant Secretary. She passes on her regards. She had a competing event today. When you look at our three priorities, our top three priorities in Africa, and you look at the Biden administration's announcement at the beginning of the administration, they really focused on, I think, three key priorities. And one is to promote democracy in Africa. The answer is very simple for that. When you look at surveys throughout the continent, there's still a lot of support for democratic institutions, especially among young people. I cover West Africa, and so unfortunately we've seen some democratic backsliding in the region. But I think history shows democracies do not go to war against each other. Democracies provide the foundation for stable economies and prosperity, and that's definitely one of the areas where we're significantly involved. Secondly, we want to counter violent extremism. And this is a goal that we all share. It's a goal that African countries want us to partner with them on. We've got a mutual interest in stopping the spread of extremism. And we know that we also must tackle the root causes of extremism. So we just can't focus on, say, security assistance, providing physical responses to attacks that occur. We have to promote development. We have to promote economic development. We have to provide opportunities for youth. And we continue to do that. We are still the #1 donor of humanitarian assistance in Africa. Our USAID counterparts are heavily engaged in the health sector, and in providing food security. And in terms of successes, I think coming out of the COVID pandemic, that certainly has to be one of the highlights of the administration. We spent over $2 billion providing vaccines to the most needy countries on the continent, and I think we played a significant role in helping roll back the pandemic and providing the foundation for a stable economic recovery after that, and that continues to this day. It continues with expanding economic relationships, just recently with the private sector, with the Corporate Council in Africa's summit in Houston, which I know several of your heads of state have attended, along with the heads of many of our major companies that are investing in Africa. There's a recognition that it's the private sector that is driving economic development. We, as a government, do not direct companies on where to go. But it's up to us to broadcast what the opportunities are so that the companies can take advantage of those opportunities. And when you look at Africa, you're looking at a population that's growing and is young. I spent a lot of my time in East Asia recently, the past several tours, in many countries where population growth is negative, and people talk about the depopulation of Asia, the aging of the workforce. And when you look at Africa, it's the complete opposite. Some countries that I visited, the average age is 14 or 15 years old. So it's very important for us to promote economic development in these countries and broadcast the opportunities for our companies there, because when we look at the African continent, say by 2050 or beyond, I really do believe it's going to be an engine of growth for the world, and we have to be involved in that.
Mike, thank you very much for those three priorities. Let me turn to our colleagues at the Defense Department. I'm going to ask Maureen Farrell to list what she sees as the top three priorities for the Defense Department in policy towards the continent.
Thank you, and thank you all for sharing your time with us. It's an honor for us to get to engage with you all, and thank you to USIP for hosting this important discussion. The Defense Department has two main priorities in Africa. We share with our State Department colleagues the goal of countering violent extremism. It's a shared concern for our African colleagues, and it's certainly a concern of ours as well, to our interests as well as our homeland. And bolstering allies and partnership is a key aspect of what we're doing in the Department of Defense. So we're quite focused on those two arenas. It's very important to us to have substantive relationships with partners on the continent. We don't have transactional relationships, we have partnerships, and we meet our African colleagues as peers. And so we see that as a distinguishing feature in the way that we engage, particularly in our defense sector engagements. We have a lot of tools through which we do this, through our security cooperation, through our exercises, through our other defense engagements, our ship visits. So we have a range of ways that we operationalize this, and we do so in partnership with African partners who have expressed a willingness to work with us. And so we are deeply grateful for those partnerships that we see as mutually beneficial. I'll end there.
Maureen, thank you very much. I'm going to ask your colleague from DOD to make a few comments and to say what her priorities are or what the J5 priorities are.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, my priorities are the same as Maureen's priorities as sort of the action arm, if you will, on the military side of Department of Defense. So we also counter VEO and partnerships and allies are our two priorities. And as I said, we take direction and guidance from the Secretary via the Chairman, General Brown, and then we carry that out. The on-the-ground action arm really also is AFRICOM, so that's led by General Langley. And so they're in country, and the people that we have deployed in Africa work through AFRICOM. And so I'm kind of in the middle, if you will, here at the Pentagon to help connect AFRICOM with Department of Defense. In terms of our, more specifically, and perhaps more tactical, countering transnational threats and malign actors, very specifically as part of the counter VEO. Strengthening security forces is a very high priority, just given some of the geography and some of the strategic locations in Africa, so that we partner with our African partners in order to, again, advance the interests not just of the United States, but to also protect the security of Africa. And promoting regional security, stability, and prosperity, those are the intended outcomes.
Admiral, thank you very much. I'm going to now ask our last U.S. government colleague, our colleague from the Department of Commerce, Arun, can you say what your top three priorities are at the Commerce Department?
Happy to, and thank you for having me here. It's really quite an honor to be with our friends on this panel and our friends from the African Diplomatic Corps. Well, it is the Department of Commerce after all, so it will come as no surprise that our focus singularly is on economic growth and prosperity. And we do that through our American businesses, of course. As the agency in the U.S. government that is the voice of American business here and abroad, what we do is we work very closely with American businesses to identify opportunities overseas and make sure that they can avail themselves of those opportunities in ways that create natural win-win outcomes for both our countries. And so as we look at our priorities, they're threefold. The first is how we can advance a digital economy in ways that harness the benefits of that economy for all people in every market that we work in. And this we do through supporting our American companies that are often the very foundations for small businesses and small entrepreneurs to succeed, because they provide the most basic tools to help businesses reach customers. We also work on policy alignment, where we identify ways in which the digital economy can best be brought to bear for people that are on the ground, so that the digital economy is not just for the privileged few, but in fact reaches people across the country. And so we work on policy alignment through various mechanisms. And I think I'm most proud of the fact that most recently our secretary was in Kenya, where we did a joint statement on artificial intelligence and data flows and digital upskilling. And I think the name speaks for itself. These are all areas that we are proud to be working on with African partners. And I think that that joint statement reflects a watershed moment in our digital engagement, particularly because we are keen to bring our African partners to the table on issues like digital policy. The same thing is true with working with our partners on the cross-border privacy rules. And all of this work dovetails with the work on the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. The second priority I would highlight is the work that we are doing to advance the dissemination of tools to combat climate change and to grow energy security in partners around the world. And certainly for Africa, this is a priority. This is a priority not just because of climate change, but because of the most basic energy needs of the entire continent. And so what we are tasked with is working with our companies to help them commercialize, innovate, and ultimately deploy tools that will help governments and citizens around the world achieve reductions in carbon emissions and also achieve greater use of renewable energy in ways that advance their broader development objectives. Ultimately, of course, any solution for climate change is going to come from the private sector, and so that is why the work we do with our companies is so important, and the work we've done under the President's leadership with the Inflation Reduction Act is so critical to the development of those new technologies. The last thing I would mention is not so much a policy priority, but definitely a priority for our agency. We run the Foreign Commercial Service, which works very closely with our foreign service partners in the State Department and other agencies. But our job is really to help advance American companies and help them do business in foreign countries. And what we're working on right now is realigning our footprint. We are a 42-year-old organization, and we're very proud of the work that we've done around the world, including in Africa. But the truth is we are not positioned the way we would be if we were created today. And so we are working to realign our footprint to be more present in Africa so we can work more closely with our partners there.
Arun, thank you very much. Let me summarize very quickly. We've heard from our colleagues at the State Department, the Defense Department, the Department of Commerce, and they've shared with us what they see as their top priorities. And we've heard about 5 or 6 things: support for democracy, countering violent extremism, promotion of development, supporting commercial trade and investment, building out the digital economy, and working to realign the Foreign Commercial Service. These are all priorities that we see across the board. I'm going to now turn to the African Union Ambassador, Ambassador Suka-Mafudze, and ask whether these are priorities that align with those of the African Union. But I'll start by saying, what are the 3 top priorities for the African Union, and how do these priorities align with what you've heard?
I think there are so many moving parts. Let me start by thanking you, Ambassador Carson. Let me thank the U.S. Institute of Leadership and also Ambassador Dr. Sani for reinforcing this relationship with the African Union. And I would want to say this training of the diplomats here, African diplomats here, is just a true testimony of this relationship, which is very strong, a relationship which we are looking forward to strengthen, make it bigger, and make things, there's a lot that we can do together. Let me also say, I think the Biden-Harris administration, we have steadily made sure, and I'll also say it's also proved by the agencies that are here, that there's a steady movement of embracing Africa, of working with Africa, and we are really appreciative of all that. For the 3 priorities that Africa has today, the topical issues that are really with us. I would say I'll begin with the AGOA. We're looking at the seamless renewal of AGOA. I think before the end of the year, I would say all these countries that are members of the AGOA can't wait. And also with what we've been talking about as African Union, to say there should be a reassurance for those doing business with us on the continent, them to know there's continuity. And the renewal of AGOA should be well on time and also seamless. I think that would be appreciated by Africa. That's the first out of the three. And let me hasten to say, there's this enhancement of collaboration that we're seeing that would want the US to pay attention to, of an approach to regional and continental levels. We are doing a lot on our own as countries from Africa to ensure we move together. Just recently, at the summit, we adopted the second 10-year plan of that development of Africa, and the second year plan of Agenda 2063. We're going into the second 10-year plan. And we are saying it will be very important for that approach to be at the regional level and at the continental level. And it will ensure the work that we're doing ourselves on the continent. And also they say in politics, there's a game of numbers. In the minute we are together, we know, we bind, give each other assurances, things will go on well. And we would want you to also take that approach. We really would want the elevation and the cooperation of the digital technology. In view, our theme of the year is education of African Union. And we are saying we would want you to enhance that relationship with us at those levels of the digital and technology to move things further. And they're seeing where the world is going. I think we really would want your enhancement in your working with us on issues to do with technology. Thank you, Ambassador Carson.
Thank you. Now I'm going to call on our Vice President at USIP, Director of the African Center, and ask Dr. Joseph Sani whether he can offer some thoughts on what should be U.S. priorities, and if he has any comments on any of the remarks that have been made so far. Sani.
Thank you, Ambassador Carson, and thank you to all the diplomats who attended the seminars, because I know it was a great commitment of time. You are busy people, your embassies are understaffed, and then for you to take the time to come here and share your knowledge and learn is a testament to your commitment, to the strength of the partnerships between your countries and the United States. And we are humbled to be a facilitator of that experience. So to come back to your question, Ambassador Carson, I will focus mainly on the three priorities we have as the Africa Center. Those priorities reflect some of what we have heard here, but from a peace and security perspective. We have three main priorities as a center. Number one, we want to invest and strengthen the regional institutions, because Africa, unlike many other regions, have a peace and security architecture anchored around the regional economic communities. We tend to forget that. And for us, from a security and peace building perspective, we think these regional economic communities can be catalyzers of any partnership between the United States and Africa in terms of peace and security. So we see an opportunity there to work and contribute to strengthen those anchors in the peace and security architecture. Number two, just like you mentioned, Ambassador, we want to invest in people. So for us, we want to scale up our efforts in building the capacity of frontline peace builders and their networks, particularly women and youth. So we are working with women in the Sahel, in the Horn of Africa, encouraging them and strengthening them and providing them the opportunity to contribute in areas such as preventing violence, extremism, community mediation, etc. Number three, we want to support, and we work, not just we want, we are working to support national and regional efforts towards democratic and peaceful transitions in countries affected by coup d'etat, in countries experiencing democratic erosion. So we want to, we work with the regional institutions and national institutions as well as stakeholders. I think this also contributes to the priority we identify here in terms of promoting and supporting democracies. There is also one last priority. My friend Arun mentioned commercial and economic development. In this case, we are focusing on critical minerals. We have seen this rodeo before. A commodity boom in Africa, unfortunately, is followed by resource curves. We want to avoid that this time. So we are working with various partners to see how we can strengthen and support communities around artisanal minings and around mine communities so that they can be resilient to conflict and also take the full advantage of what mining exploration processing will deliver. So those are the four main priorities, which I think support the priorities identified here. Thanks.
Thank you, Sani, for those comments. We're going to move to that second question that was presented to the panel, and that is, what are some of the misconceptions about U.S. engagement in Africa? And how do we go about trying to dispel them? And I'm going to go again and turn to Deputy Assistant Secretary Mike Heath for his initial comments.
Thanks, Johnny. Well, I think one of the misconceptions that we face, or that I face when I travel around the continent, is that people will say to us, the United States, you're only interested in our country because of great power competition, or you're only involved in our country because you're trying to get us to choose a path and choose your way of thinking and your concept of development and governance as opposed to another concept. My response is, I've been involved in Africa now for over 3 decades on and off, and I was grateful to meet Johnny the first time in 1998 when we first put AGOA through Congress, the very first version, and the act was actually being drafted at that time. And great power competition was the furthest thing from our minds when we developed the concept of AGOA. The whole point of AGOA was to promote trade as a complement to aid, not necessarily replacing aid, but there was a very strong emphasis on promoting the private sector in growing African economies by using our market access to assist those economies. And we did have a series of conditions attached to become eligible for AGOA. And it's true that in some cases people said those conditions were sort of neo-colonialist. You're telling us what to do. But when we talked about these conditions, we talked about the benchmarks when it came to democratic governance, respect for human rights, the rule of law. Most of our partners looked at those and said, hey, wait a second, we agree with all of these things. These things are good things for our populations and our countries. Why wouldn't we try to meet those benchmarks in order to qualify for AGOA? And I'm very gratified to see that 3 decades on, we're still talking about AGOA. In other areas where we've provided a tremendous amount of assistance, Despite these days of constrained financial resources, we've spent over $100 billion to combat HIV/AIDS on the continent. And I think many don't recognize, including in my own country, unfortunately, don't recognize what a terrific boon this was for healthcare in Africa. I think it's not an exaggeration to say that millions of people are alive today because of this. And we may not be in the business necessarily of building roads, building airports, building buildings, although we do get involved in some of this through our MCC. But PEPFAR was focused on saving lives. And there are millions of people right now that are walking throughout their cities and the rural areas in various countries around Africa because of PEPFAR. I think we need to do a better job of broadcasting why we did this. I would be hard-pressed to find anybody who would argue that this has something to do with great power competition or we did it because we were trying to ask countries to take a different path. We just did it because it was the right thing to do. And we are there to provide African countries with a choice. We welcome competition, and we think that if you're given an opportunity to have choices, then in most cases you're going to look to us very closely because of the power of our example, the power of our assistance programs, and also the strength of our economy and our companies.
Mike, thank you very much. I'm going to just editorialize with just one sentence on PEPFAR. Last year was the 25th anniversary of PEPFAR. And during that period, the U.S. government believes that 25 million lives were saved during that period. 25 million lives, 90% of whom were in Africa. So it is one of those things of great significance, as are many of the institutional healthcare responses, whether we look more recently at COVID or we look at the pandemic that ravaged Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Guinea a decade ago. Anyway, I'm going to now turn to the Assistant Secretary from DOD, Maureen Farrell, and ask her what are some of the misconceptions that people see when they look at the Department of Defense and its engagement in Africa, and how do you go about trying to dispel them?
Thanks very much. I think we could have our own panel on different people's ideas on what they think U.S. DoD is doing around the world, including in Africa. So the two misconceptions that I would highlight are actually competing misperceptions. The first is that we've militarized our relationships in Africa. And the fact of the matter is, you can look at our foreign assistance on the internet, on foreignassistance.gov. The amount of military assistance that we have pales in comparison to our development and humanitarian assistance. So in sheer dollars, we defiantly have not militarized our relationships with Africa and have an extremely small footprint on the continent. We pale in comparison to the size of the numbers of embassies that we have on the continent, the number of USAID missions that we have. We have very limited, very small numbers of teams that are mostly temporarily and in rare cases actually assigned to African locations. So the Department of Defense is fully in support of our diplomatic and development partners and also enabler for our economic investments on the continent. So that's the first misconception, that we've militarized our relationship. On the other side, there is an argument that we have abrogated our defense responsibilities to the continent and that we are insufficiently invested in the defense sector. And this is a challenge, of course, as it's no secret that the Department of Defense and the U.S. government is looking towards the Indo-Pacific for many of our cross-government priorities. And we also have an urgent threat in Europe. So we are consistently fighting for resources for Africa, and we're not shy about admitting that. That being said, Africa remains a critical priority for many of the reasons my colleague Das Heath mentioned, in particular the population growth and the opportunity for collaboration and economic prosperity between the United States and many countries across Africa. So it is an area where we're looking to expand, but have by no means stepped away from Africa. I think there's a pretty strong show of interest from our combatant command at U.S. Africa Command in Germany to engage on the continent, and it is certainly a focus area in the Pentagon where I work. Thank you.
Very good. I'm going to change up a little bit and not ask you at this point, Admiral, but I'm going to turn to our colleague at the Department of Commerce, Arun, and ask you what are some of the common misperceptions that exist.
I would say that the two misperceptions I would identify are actually flip sides of the same coin. They build off what Michael was talking about in terms of great power competition. On the one hand, there is this misperception about our focus on Africa being a byproduct of great power competition. And let me speak to it from the economic and commercial perspective. That is absolutely not the case. Look, I'm from the Commerce Department. I'm in the business of helping American business, and American business looks for opportunities. So for us, when we look at Africa, Africa is a continent of opportunities. There is so much there. Michael highlighted some of the demographic changes that underpin those opportunities. A continent that produces M-Pesa, Flutterwave, and other incredible innovative companies. It's a continent where we need to be as a commercial matter. And so we are eager to find more African partners, to do more business with African partners. And we know that when we do business with our African partners, we win and our African partners win. And that is the nature of business. That's the whole purpose of business deals, is that both sides are gaining something and succeeding by virtue of those deals. And so, do we pay attention to what our competitors do on the continent? Sure. We do that in Europe too. We do that in Latin America. When you're in a competitive world order and when you're trying to get the best business you can, you do pay attention to your competitors. But that's not the reason we pay attention to Africa. And the flip side of that is a misconception that we are interested in transactional relationships. And again, I think that is most decidedly not the case. Unlike other countries, our businesses don't make short-term decisions. We don't tell our businesses where to go, and they make their decisions based on economic and business rationales. And when they invest, when they show up for the long haul. Our businesses do not pop in and pop out based on political whims or flights of fancy of government leaders. That's just not the case. When they show up, they're committed to that economy because they have made a perhaps slow and deliberative, but ultimately a thoughtful decision that economy is worth investing in. And when they look at those investment decisions, those are not investment decisions for this year or even the next 5 years. They often look at those investment decisions on a 20-year cycle. And so that is an investment that our companies make all over. And so that, to me, underscores the fact that the partnerships that we are seeking with our African friends are enduring partnerships, are the types of partnerships that don't just benefit us today, but we're in it for the long haul. And that's what's really most important to us, whoever we compete with.
Ambassador Suka-Mafudze, I'm going to ask you roughly the same question, but from a slightly different angle. And that is, what do you think American policymakers and generally the public misunderstand about the continent when they look at it?
Thank you, Ambassador Carson, for the question. I would want to think there's a lot here. And 55 member states, okay, we call them 54 member states of Africa, the vast Africa. And in which each and every country, which is let me say slightly different, but anyway, that's why there's this union to actually come together, work together. Yes, there's talk on the ground. And who would say they don't know that America took long to take advantage of what Africa was putting on the table? This is who we are as Africa, and this is the business. These are the businesses, and this let's work together, mutually benefiting, mutually respectful, doing a lot together. But America took a bit of time for them to get on the continent. This is another very big misconception that is out there. Surely when, just giving it as an example, you leave your child being taken care of, not a child is, say, your brother being taken care of someone else. Others are rushing. They are seeing the opportunity on the ground in the continent. And there's just that slow movement. We really worry about it. And I'll say, me representing the continent of Africa here with the ambassadors, making my life easy, running with the bilateral. I'm looking for ways that America can make it much better, strengthen that relationship, move to be on the continent. We have had a very strong relationship, but I think there's maybe a tall order, which I think should be relooked. There's a lot that is happening. These agencies are doing a lot. And the business side, the commerce is doing a lot. But I think let's step up. Let America step up. I'm looking for ways, as ambassador here of African Union, for America to step up to make better. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Let me turn now to Dr. Sani and ask him what he sees as some of the common misperceptions of U.S. engagement on the continent, and how can they be reshaped or changed?
That's a tough one. I think I agree with some of the misconceptions already identified, but I will challenge the ambassador here and some of the ambassadors in the room. I think there's one, fatal misconception is that the United States is responsible of the outcome of the engagement with Africa. That the United States alone is responsible. No, it takes two to tango. It takes two to tango. The United States can play its part, and of course there is a lot to be said on how we can improve, the United States can improve, but African countries will also have to play their part. Just a quick example. We all saw and read the U.S. strategy for Africa. The EU has a strategy for Africa. With no offense to anyone, even small countries in Europe have their strategy for Africa. I'm yet to see an EU strategy for the United States. Yet to see an African country strategy towards the United States. If you value a partner, if you value a partnership, it is important to think through how to leverage that partnership. So building a strategy towards that partner matters. The data shows something like AGOA. Countries on the continent that have improved the utilization of AGOA are those countries with all of a government strategy towards AGOA. These are the countries that have thought through how to leverage AGOA. The United States has different tools, DFC, MCC, AGOA, you name it, smart partnership, etc. Countries should think through, and I'm calling my colleagues, my friends, ambassadors, to think through not all the tools may be adapted or relevant to your country. But for those mechanisms, think through what is the government strategy to leverage those mechanisms. And so without that, it will be difficult to optimize the partnership. And both countries, both the United States and African countries will always be suboptimal as they engage without a clear strategy. Thank you.
Sonny, thank you very, very much. I'm going to start randomly asking a few questions, and I'm going to ask our colleague Arun from the Department of Commerce whether he can share with us any thoughts on how the Department of Commerce is deploying its attachés around Africa. There are frequently questions about the number of attachés that are in countries like Japan, Germany, France, where they're advanced economies and where American corporate interests are deeply engaged, and some would argue need less assistance. While looking at the continent, the number of attachés is significantly lower, and there's less representation. Along with that question is a question that we frequently hear, at least I've heard over the last year, and that is from the large diaspora community across the United States. And that diaspora community is well educated. Many of them are in business and commercial activities. They have ongoing ties to the continent. And they ask the question, if in fact the Department of Commerce is promoting business mostly outward from the United States to different parts of the world, are there any efforts underway to strengthen the Department of Commerce's outreach to the diaspora community in Africa to strengthen the broader economic ties with the continent? So two questions in one, and we'll be a little bit more random now with these questions.
Great. Thank you for that question, Ambassador. So the questions. So on our presence in Africa, look, let's just be real, woefully inadequate for the vision and the ambition that we have. There is just a fundamental disconnect between our numbers on the ground and where we want to be today, much less where we want to be going forward. That's why I mentioned earlier that we are realigning our footprint, because we love our friends in Germany and Japan, and there's plenty of work for my teams there, I can assure you, they tell me all the time. But it is, I think our current footprint reflects perhaps an outdated conception of allocation of our resources, where historically, and again, we're a 42-year-old organization, we had followed the trade. And so where there was more trade, we were more present. And 42 years ago, you can imagine what that would have looked like. We've tried to change a little bit since then, but at its core, we are fundamentally off base in our allocation of resources. And so what we're trying to do now is shift that footprint, but also shift our vision and our mission, so that as we don't just follow our companies where they are going, but also show up in places where they should be and where the economic opportunity exists, so that we can make our companies aware of those opportunities. Our job when we're in a lot of the markets in Africa is to be aware of what's happening, understand the government's priorities, recognize where our companies can help advance those government priorities, and then bring those opportunities to the understanding of our companies here at home so that they can participate in those opportunities in Africa. I think that's a very different job from the historical conception of the Foreign Commercial Service, particularly in areas like Western Europe. But we are more than up for it. We are very excited about it. And as we engage our African partners to discover those opportunities and see where American companies can be part of the solutions that governments there are looking for, we need to be present on the ground to maximize those conversations so that we can help those opportunities be actualized by our companies. So we're looking forward to expanding our footprint in Africa with the gracious permission of our African diplomatic friends and our friends at the State Department. That's our vision going forward in terms of increasing our presence on the ground. I very much appreciate the reference to the African diaspora. I feel like I planted that question. That's such a great question, because one of the things that we are doing in our programs, we are integrating Africa across all of our programmatic activities. And that's one of the ways we are changing our approach to Africa. And what I mean by that is, instead of just, okay, we're doing Africa and there's Africa over here and then everything else is over here, we are looking at some of our cross-cutting programs and making sure that Africa takes a central role in that. And so, for example, with our Global Diversity Export Initiative, we are trying to reach new populations and bring our export promotion and trade services to American businesses in underserved communities across the country, and particularly targeting diaspora communities, and including the African diaspora. And why do we do that? Because we're in the business of helping small businesses understand the opportunities of exporting and getting the benefits of exporting. There are no companies better suited to being new exporters than diaspora communities and diaspora-owned businesses. Because when we're part of a diaspora, we know the old country. We know what it's like. We're already used to dealing with people that live differently from us. We are often the other, even in the United States. And so that is such an advantage. And so what we've done is we've really targeted our African diaspora friends in the business community. And in fact, last year we had a Global Diversity Export Initiative mission to Nigeria, South Africa, and Ghana, where we brought a lot of African diaspora businesses. And I'm proud to say that we've already had deals as a result of that.
Arun, thank you very much. I'm going to jump to Mike and ask a related question to the commerce question. In December of 2022, the administration held the second U.S. Africa Leaders Summit. There were numerous pledges and announcements that were made at that summit. We're now a year and 4 months beyond the summit. Can you give me an assessment of how, from the department's viewpoint, the summit has played out in terms of building and strengthening the bilateral relationship between the United States and the states that were invited to the summit?
Thanks, Johnny. Thanks for that question. And I have to admit, I think you're even better placed to answer that than me as the person in charge of implementation of the outcomes of the summit. But the National Diaspora Council that we just mentioned is one of the outcomes of that summit and one of the more successful outcomes. I think it's been very useful to get to tap into the diaspora members of the communities here in the creative arts especially. And so we've had a number of Hollywood leaders, including producers and people involved in acting, who have gone back to the African continent and engaged with their counterparts in other countries to start up their own industries. I think we saw a series of MCC deals, Millennium Challenge Corporation. I don't know if you're all familiar with that, but the MCC has done a tremendous amount of work in a number of countries in Africa, working on compacts which are identified and developed with the assistance of experts within those countries. So we're not going to the countries to explain what we think needs to be done. We're listening very closely to what the needs of those countries are. And these can include infrastructure projects. They can include rehabilitating trade routes, energy projects. I don't have the figures exactly in front of me, but several $100 million worth of deals were created under the auspices of MCC. And then just to highlight what Arun said, when I go to Africa, I sometimes meet with entrepreneurs. In many cases, they're assisted by U.S. aid in developing their businesses. And in one interesting visit to a company that was making soap products out of palm oil, and this is not palm oil that's harvested unsustainably. This is taken from apparently the seeds of the trees without actually cutting them down. And I offered to buy several of the products from this gentleman, and he told me, well, you can just go back to the States and buy them in Whole Foods Market, because we've got a contract now to sell them in the U.S. And I asked this gentleman, he's very young, he's only 25 years old, what his background was, because he spoke English perfectly, and he told me he just graduated from MIT. He had job offers with Microsoft and Google available after he graduated, and he decided to go back to his home country instead and start a business because he thought he could make a better impact that way. He had 300 employees already within the first 2 years of operation of his company, and he just felt a sense of satisfaction that was greater than what he would have obtained if he had stayed in the U.S. And worked here. So I think a lot of these successes grow slowly, but when you lay down the roots of collaboration and you tap into our educational system and the benefits that we can provide here and help companies grow in collaboration with USAID, but also with the Foreign Commercial Service, I think that the dividends are going to continue to pay for years to come.
No, thank you, Mike, and I think it's very important. That last point that you made, and I think it's been raised before. I think Ambassador Suka-Mafudze talked about the theme for the African Union this year is education for African youth, building deeper knowledge of technology, IT, and technology connectivity. One of the things that came out of the U.S. Africa Leaders Summit, and probably one of the signature initiatives going forward, was the Digital Transformation with Africa initiative, which is valued at some $800 million and is a collaboration between state, the Department of Commerce being the principal players, along with USAID and the business community of the United States, and it's taken off. It's still pretty significant, but it's taken flight, and it's important. We can come back to that. I'm going to jump again and ask our colleagues from the Defense Department to a couple of questions, if I could. One looks at the panelists up here, and there are two from DOD. And I'm going to ask them to give us a deeper dive and a better understanding of the Defense Department and the role that both the civilian advisors to the Secretary and the uniform services do. What are the different roles that are played by the Department of Defense? And after we get that question, I'm going to ask you a much more challenging question. Someone has mentioned already that we have seen a level of democratic backsliding across the continent. In the last 4.5 years, we've seen military takeovers in Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, the Gambia, and Guinea-Conakry, just to name a few. There were a number of newspaper articles that circulated a story in saying that a number of the coup leaders had been trained in American military institutions. How does the U.S. military engage with African military officers when it comes to issues of democracy and respect for constitutional authority and rule of law? I know that second one's challenging, but it's one that is of and should be of interest. So the first one, different roles for uniformed services, J5, and the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy.
Thank you. It's a really foundational question to the way that we're organized as the U.S. Department of Defense. We, of course, operate under the principle of civilian control of the military. So the Secretary has a team of civilian advisors advising on policy and process, and we're also charged in the Office of the Secretary of Defense for Policy with coordinating with our interagency partners, because, of course, we're not operating in a vacuum as DOD. We're complementing the work of our other departments and agencies. So I'm the senior advisor to the Secretary on African Affairs, with others above me working on broader strategy issues as well. And I'm complemented by advisors and those who inform the process who wear uniforms. So we share the responsibility of providing information to the ultimate decision maker, which is a civilian at the head of the department, which at the moment is Secretary Lloyd Austin. So our Constitution has very strict regulations about this, and we never have a uniformed officer at the head of our Department of Defense. That being said, the consultation with our subject matter experts who wear the uniform, who are doing the do, as we say, is essential to making sure that's an informed policy process. So maybe I'll defer to my colleague from the Joint Staff, and then we can take the bigger rock.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Perfect answer. I think I'll riff off the theme of we are a civilian-led military, and so at the very top is the secretary, and then you have the chairman, General Brown. At the Joint Staff, we're a bit of an anomaly. We don't really own anything. We don't command anyone, but we're right in the mix, and we're really the connective tissue between the COCOMs, who actually do report to the secretary. However, we also coordinate. The Joint Chiefs are the service chiefs, and so we also play a role there in connecting the services to bring them into the joint force when there are decisions on global force management, which really is a way of saying you only have X amount of an asset, whether it's an aircraft carrier or some other type of military equipment. Where are we putting our forces around the world? And the chairman, in consultation with the services and input from the COCOMs, the combatant commanders who have the need, he makes those decisions. And so in the Joint Staff, we have a budget directorate, we have a force directorate, force posture directorate. I happen to be in the strategy, plans, and posture and policy. Sorry, and so we are colleagues in that we confer with each other, but we each have individual lanes, and so we collaborate on issues, and ultimately the decisions that are made come from the secretary, and policy is put out, and then we, as I said earlier, we're sort of the execution arm, and we advise the chairman on how we can use the forces that are available to execute the guidance from the secretary, and then he takes that to the secretary and through the National Security Council up through to the president to make a decision. And so we have separate and distinct roles, but very closely aligned. And if we aren't collaborating, it's going to all fall apart, I think. So I hope that we are this anomaly at the Joint Staff. We're sometimes just the Imperial Joint Staff because we tell everyone else what to do, but we don't really control the forces. It's again the combatant commanders that do. But we're here to help. So
Thank you, Admiral. Maureen, you want to take the tough one that I gave?
Yeah, it's an excellent question, and it's a really important one that as policymakers we wrestle with and think a lot about in terms of our strategy and how we're engaging with the continent. We are not charged with democracy promotion in the Department of Defense, but we support our partners in other departments and agencies who have that mission. For us, we take issue with those who would like to draw a connection between our training and coups. The amount of people that we have trained across the African continent and those who have led coups, of course, is less than 0.001%. So we don't draw a causal effect there. That being said, there is an undeniable trend of democratic backsliding across the continent, which fundamentally is at odds with U.S. values. So we are challenged with trying to advance our security objectives in shared partnership with African colleagues who may take different perspectives on what this should look like. So we most closely align with partners who have shared objectives with us in terms of how they view the world, but we also sometimes work with other partners where we purely have a discrete security objective that we would like to accomplish together, even if we have other differences. And so there are times where we end up collaborating strictly in security spaces. But in general, our goal is to support our diplomatic and development colleagues in our work on the continent and to be very judicious in how we think about the selection of our trainees. With your help, with the support of our embassies in the field, we have very rigorous processes through which we select trainees. There's extensive vetting. And broadly, for the trainings that we conduct, I'm sure you're all aware that we have human rights requirements to pass a vetting process through legislation from Senator Leahy of Vermont from many, many years ago, through which we are prohibited statutorily from training those who have been implicated in gross violations of human rights, which is a principle that applies around the world for us. It is not exclusively applied in any location. It is a standard for all U.S. government security assistance. So it's a partnership with our African colleagues in your ministries of defense to identify those who are best placed to receive our training, and it's an ongoing discussion in terms of our policy.
Very good.
Can I just add,
Sure,
since
go ahead.
all the countries you mentioned are in my region,
Oh,
and I cover
okay.
West Africa, right? So my impression is the populations of these countries share our values. They want democratic governance. It's an ideal that they strive towards. There are some criticisms of the way democratic governance is implemented in certain countries. There are countries that are also under severe security threat from violent extremist organizations, and governments feel that they want to address that security threat first and provide a stable situation for them to embark on elections. Now, of course, we may have differing opinions on the viability of restoring democracy. We tend to think that it is possible in many of these countries, and that once they can restore democracy, then we can resume the full gamut of our assistance to these countries. But at the same time, we still maintain a very strong humanitarian assistance program in many of these countries, and in several countries where there have been coups, we are still the #1 donor of humanitarian assistance, and that just exemplifies our willingness to stand by the population, to help them meet their basic needs, ensure they have food security and basic health care. And we still share the goal. We are a democracy as well. We have issues that we have to cope with. I think we're all on the same path towards trying to perfect our democracies. We stand with our partners in the long term. We're hoping that the ones that have backslid, as you say, Johnny, are eventually going to come on to our path as well. And we want to do everything we can to promote that.
Great. I've been monopolizing the questions, and I could ask a few more, but I'm going to open this up to the audience and ask if there are any questions from the floor that would like to be asked. I would ask you to do two very important things for me. One is to identify yourself and to make your question a question and your comment a comment, both of the latter being short and brief. Mr. Ambassador.
Good afternoon.
Yes.
Thank you, and very happy to be part of this conversation. Starting from the point that Mike raised at the beginning, that democracies don't fight democracies. I wonder if that notion still stands today. Because, by the way, Sekou Berté, Ambassador of Mali.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I wonder if that notion still stands today, because we were considered as one of the vibrant democracies in West Africa. And suddenly, after the downfall of Gaddafi, we found ourselves invaded by terrorists. We don't know where they came from. We are not a terrorist country. And we found almost nobody to come to our help at the beginning. And after, there was on the international side, MINUSMA and other 14 countries and international organizations crafted to help us fight against terrorism. It took more than 10 years. Instead of terrorism going down, it was growing. We have to kick out all those organizations. So today, we all know that today on the ground, things are better than before. So why then, being a vibrant democracy, we didn't get no assistance from so-called democracy and think everything went down? That's first. Second.
No, sir, there are others who are going to ask questions.
Second, that's to the Defense Department. So I just want to ask all my questions one time.
Let me just say, I said brief questions, brief comments.
Okay.
And you got a brief question now for the Defense Department, Mr. Ambassador.
Defense Department and also to the Commerce Department. So two more questions.
No, sir. And because you're going to ask two questions, I'll have to call foul. Next question, please.
Okay, I'll go to the Commerce Department then. Maybe.
No, if anyone else has a question, we'll come back to you, Mr. Ambassador.
All right.
Yes, Mr. Ambassador. Yeah, over there.
Please allow me to stand, and
Yes.
I want to take this opportunity to really thank.
Please identify yourself, please.
Yes, I'm Ambassador of Cameroon. I'm saying that I'm taking this opportunity to thank the Institute for this gathering. I think listening to the discussions, one thing has to be admitted. It is that we are really appreciative of the cooperation between our respective countries and the United States. To be specific, there are two grounds where an effective cooperation can be identified on the security ground and the health. Here are the domains where collaboration and cooperation is unquestionable. And I want to take this opportunity to praise the constant attitude of the United States with this helping hand. But my question is related to a structural organization of your country. You have the balance, what you call the balance of power. Every branch having its own autonomy. When we see the institution functioning, the impression is generally that the executive branch has an agenda which is not the same with the elective branch. Let me be specific, and in my interpretation, maybe I'm wrong. I'm just asking to be corrected. Sometimes we have worked out agenda with the executive, but when the elective branch is involved, it is not a kind of partnership relation we wish to see. Okay. We are being dictated not to do this, rather doing that. So how do you think this situation could contribute to boost what we want to build with you, a real partnership? Because it has implications, including in the economic and commercial relations. So I will limit myself to this.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Is there a third question before we move back to those two? And I have a... Okay. Well, we'll let Mike answer, Mr. Ambassador, and then we'll get a response to the second question.
You want me to answer for the Defense Department?
No. I think you answered for the question of Mali and security. I think it was the question the ambassador said was that Mali was described as a strong and vibrant democracy a decade ago, and when it was facing security problems, its democratic partners seemingly didn't respond, and Now the situation is different. Yeah.
Well, sure. I think you directed your question at the Defense Department, so I'll let my colleagues answer
Okay,
as
well,
well. But I mean, obviously, sir, you know more about the history of your country than I do, and so you're going back a ways. I would just say that, as you know, our legislation requires us to stop assistance, military assistance, not humanitarian assistance, to governments that have enacted coups, and that's the direction that your government chose to take. Whether or not you're more secure now than you would have been otherwise, I don't know. I think that's a matter of debate, because I think if you had still had a democratic government in place, you would have had access to the full scope of our security assistance in addition to other forms of assistance. And I don't know whether that situation would have been better or not. I think probably it could have been. I think your country is still experiencing quite a bit of instability, which is unfortunate. But I think we'd have to get into a longer discussion on that. And I know you and I have already had those discussions over many lunches, and we'll continue to do that. But that's all I'll say right now before turning it over.
Okay. Maureen, do you want to
Just
share?
briefly, we're very sympathetic to your plight against the terrorist threat. We have been victim to terrorist attacks too, and it's very understandable to feel helpless against a threat that non-state actors are very hard to fight. So we appreciate the challenges that you face. I think earlier in our relationship, we really lifted up Mali's democracy, and as the host of the Communities of Democracies meeting previously, and a whole range of support that we provided in law enforcement and defense sector support was quite robust prior to the change in constitution, change in government that you had. So I think that while we have priorities across the U.S. government that lead us to fund different countries at different levels, we saw Mali as a very important partner in West Africa prior to the change in your government that was a very top priority for us in the West African sub-region. So we appreciated that partnership deeply.
Does someone want to take the question from the ambassador to Cameroon about the challenges of working in an American government that does have three branches, co-equal branches?
I'll just mention yesterday, Daseeth and I were up in Congress talking to our legislative colleagues who are performing their oversight responsibilities, and it's also a tension that is one that we operate in inside the government, and it's the part of the foundational structure of our government. And it's actually a really healthy discussion because members of Congress have constituents that they're responsive to, and we have policy that we're trying to be responsive to, and so we share the same struggle that sometimes is equally frustrating to us as it is to you. But it's part of what makes our democracy work. Democracy is messy. It's the least worst form of government. But it's the path that we've chosen that we think serves our system quite well, as frustrating it is both inside and outside.
And I would say these tensions exist in other democratic countries as well. When I go to visit our partners in Europe, they're dealing with the same situations because they have legislatures that in many cases, they control the purse strings of what we do, and we have to explain to them, and it's perfectly reasonable and right for them to ask those questions, because we have to explain why what we're doing is in the interest of the American people who are paying the taxes that fund all of our activities. And so we have to have good explanations and rationales behind that. And it just, again, it demonstrates the importance of you as ambassadors to get to grips with our whole government, which is a very big place, and meet with legislators from time to time. And when you have your leaders come here, for them to go to Congress and to meet with members of Congress to understand their concerns, and for you to present your concerns as well and explain how better our government can assist you in your priorities.
Yeah. I think, let me underscore what Mike said. And it's also traceable back to some of the comments that Dr. Sani made earlier, and that one of the things that we hope the diplomats who have taken part in these seminars appreciate is the complexity of the American democratic system. That they understand how it works, and that diplomats who come to Washington represent themselves to the executive branch, but should never feel constrained from going up and talking to legislators about the same concerns that they may raise with the executive branch. That as you go about your work, you not only have to convince and win over the executive branch, you also have to take it one step further and convince and win over the legislative branch as well. And one of the things that I've found in my many years of working in Washington with African diplomats is that they feel that they only should represent themselves to the executive branch. And if you limit yourself only to going to the State Department, as powerful an institution, as important an institution as it is, you cut yourself off from going to USAID, going to the Department of Commerce, going to the Defense Department, and going to the wide array of other U.S. government institutions, everything from MCC to the African Development Foundation, institutions that you should be working with and dealing with at the same time you're working with the State Department. So you don't want to cut yourself off from being able to have the widest engagement with the largest number of institutions and individuals in town who share or are interested in the, or perhaps interested in the issues that you're advancing for your country. So that's one of the things that I think is quite important. We've come to the end of our time. If we had more time, I would ask a lot more questions, but I'm not. And I thought it would be useful not only to thank our panelists. We appreciate very much you giving your time this afternoon to be with us, to meet with and answer questions from me, but also, and we hope that some of you will stay around and take individual questions. I also want to thank enormously the 33 African diplomats who participated in the seminar. We hope that it has been enormously beneficial for you, and we hope that you will think about USIP as a partner and a place where you can engage, talk with us about the things that we do and the challenges that we want to work with you to deal with. I also want to thank all the ambassadors who came out this afternoon as well. I want to thank our wonderful USIP staff, the Africa team under Dr. Joseph Sani, Ola in particular, who runs this program for us, for all the work that they have done in putting this together. There will be an opportunity for some drinks and food at the Leland Plaza just above us as we conclude. But I thought it would be good to end with a couple of comments from Secretary of State Blinken and a suggestion why he made those comments. In the last 2 years, the State Department and the White House have created 2 documents. In August of 2022, the Secretary of State traveled to South Africa and presented the U.S. Africa strategy document. If you haven't read it, it's an important document to read. It defines U.S. strategy and the 4 points that are guiding the administration's engagement. And the second major event in action was the U.S. Africa Leaders Summit. And there is, in fact, a very active web page run by the Africa Bureau and folks who I'm they were closely associated with me for a while, they're not anymore, who run that web page and keep it up to date. Those are two seminal things. There's a great summation of what happened at the summit, and those are the guide points for the administration's policy. But over the last 2.5 years, Secretary Blinken has said Africa is a region of growing global importance. Africa will shape the future, not just the future of the African people, but of the world. And frequently following before or after those comments, he generally reels off a whole bunch of facts. I won't go through all of them, but it's interesting for everyone to continue to remember that not only is Africa, 28% of the 192 countries that constitute the UN bloc in New York, but as somebody's mentioned here, Africa has a rapidly growing population that will represent 25% of the global population in less than 25 years from now. 1 out of 4 will be an African wherever you are in the world. A major source of the strategic minerals required to slow down climate change and to move from a fossil fuel economy to a green economy are located in Africa, in Zambia, Zimbabwe, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, just to name a few. And also that we see enormous changes going on across the continent, where we see digital technology being taken up rapidly, the innovations that are going on in Kenya and in Ghana and Nigeria in particular, which is now home to the third largest film industry in the world and growing. These are all things for the future, and they help to make us think more about Africa, why it's important, why we should pay attention, why we should be engaged. Africa is going to be increasingly more a part of our future than it has been in our past. Anyway, thank the panelists and thank you all for coming this afternoon. Please join and stay with us and have a drink upstairs. And I'm going to ask Fitz if you would do us a kind favor and do just a group photograph up here before we go. Everyone on the panel, thank you.